Okay, muting.
So for those of you who are coming on, I want to thank you very much. I'm Carolyn Schoenberger, and I'm going to be moderating, but we're going to give a few minutes for people to join us before we actually begin. And I know it's a Friday, and I appreciate it. It's certainly, we're living in a very different world, so I'm going to give it a couple minutes. So I'm in Illinois, and Michael, you're in Texas. How are things going in Texas?
Not too bad,
How are things
Caroline.
going in Texas?
Hanging in there down here. Yeah, no, doing well down here in Texas.
Are you opened up at all, or?
Yes, we have a phased
reopening,
and we have a phased reopening here in Texas. You know, honestly, I think that the governor's done a pretty good job with, you know, laying out what the requirements are, and there's some helpful checklists for public members of the public as well as companies and employers. So far so good down here. We have our fingers crossed. Sounds
great. Neil, how's my birth state? I'm a New York immigrant. How's my birth state of New York?
Well, moving slowly in terms of getting back to normal. Everybody is certainly anxious, and what I've noticed is people outside the city are not that careful. I wish they were a little more diligent. There seems to be a very nonchalant attitude on Long Island.
So as Illinoisans, what do we think about we're not Chicago, outside of Chicago started today. Chicago starts on Wednesday. Right. Steve, what do you think as a Chicagoan?
It kind of depends on where you are.
What do you think?
Like in my weird neck of the woods, everyone is respectful and wears face masks and we're distancing, and we're all very conscientious. You go not too far away and it's a completely different world. So we shall see what happens.
Keith, Gina, other Illinoisans, what's your perspective?
Yeah,
you're in Michigan now, aren't you? Or
we're can you hear me? We're struggling a little bit with the governor overlay. It's really impacting the retail and some of our smaller offices. As you know, he still has an overlay that no more than 10 people can congregate at any one time in an area. So imagine what that does to a theater, a sports club, larger retailers, restaurants. Until he lifts that 10-person overlay, we're still seeing just a lot of blood. I mean, it's not good.
Yeah. Well, Illinois, again, just started outside of Chicago, and you can't go into a restaurant. You can eat out at a restaurant. You can go get your hair done. Not in Chicago. You can't get your hair done in Chicago until Wednesday. And it's interesting. So we're at 111 participants. Can we agree that if we hit 130, we'll start?
Sure.
Okay. And for those of you who are tuning in, you know, thank you very much for joining us. We're just waiting for more people to come in so that you don't miss any of our wonderful information. So in Illinois, Chicagoans are very happy with the way the governor's been handling this. I think that's fair. Not everyone in the state is happy. He was actually sued for violating the rights of a legislator.
I'm not even sure how to comment on that, but.
Yeah, I don't know how either. Okay, we're gonna get.
Yeah, it's very weird.
Okay, I'm actually going to get started. Okay, so I want to welcome everyone for joining us today during these times. You know, I want to welcome you all to the webinar on crisis management for businesses in the time of COVID-19. This webinar is hosted by the Commission on Hispanic Rights and Responsibilities and the section on Civil Rights and Social Justice for the American Bar Association. So I want to thank all of the panelists. I want to thank people for tuning in and sharing with us. So my name is Carolyn Orzak Schoenberger. I'm the Executive Director of the Schoenberger Public Interest Law Foundation and a member of the Commission on Hispanic Rights and Responsibilities of the American Bar Association. So the world has become a place we've never imagined. If we were experiencing what we're experiencing, thinking it was the storyline plot of a sci-fi movie, we would never have believed the plot. Such is the time of the coronavirus, also known as COVID-19. The ABA is very proud to present this webinar, and we are honored to have an esteemed panel of speakers who are well known in their fields and well regarded. They will share their wisdom with you, as well as information on various resources available, and resources will be available after the webinar. So there are lots of interesting information. Each panelist has 15 minutes, so it's impossible to impart all of the wisdom. They're gonna touch on the most key points, but resources are available to you and will be made available to you. So our people who are well known in their field will provide you with information how to navigate these untested waters based on their experience with an eye towards managing this crisis now, which changes by the day, as well as any unforeseen events in the future. If you have questions, please use the Q&A. Please use Q&A as questions. We're going to go through the presentations and then we're going to entertain questions. So again, we encourage you to ask questions and we'll do so afterwards. So I'm going to introduce the panelists and then introduce the first panelist who will start speaking. Our panelists consist of Michael Maciate, who is the partner at DLA Piper out of Texas and is very well known as an attorney concerning employment law, who is of counsel to DLA Piper in Dallas, Texas. He focuses his practice on labor and employment matters, including employer relations, employee relations, employee benefits, and obligations arising in connection with mergers and acquisitions. He also counsels clients on litigation, commercial transactions, corporate compliance, and ethics. Also risk management, and he frequently conducts high-level internal investigation. Michael provides advice and counseling to entities of all sizes, ranging from Fortune 100 companies to startups on a wide variety of business and employment-related issues. He's been widely recognized for his work. In fact, he was named a Texas Rising Star Super Lawyers by Thomson Reuters in Texas. So thank you, Michael, for participating. We also have Neil Weinrib, who has been engaged in immigration legal practice for nearly 30 years, covering both the entire United States and consular practice abroad. The firm started as a one-person practice and has since grown considerably under the name of Naw Law, and currently has a staff of attorneys and paralegals, many of whom are fluent in various languages. The firm handles all aspects of U.S. immigration, including business visas, family asylum, and removal. That's a nice way of saying deportation. The recent interaction of politics and immigration has now made the practice of immigration law far more challenging than ever. In addition to the notable immigration work that Neil has done, he's also published articles, including in the New York Law Journal, articles covered in the New York Times, and has successfully filed a writ of habeas corpus in the US, which resulted in a decision on behalf of his client. Our third panelist is Stephen Hoffman, who is the founder of Law Offices of Stephen Hoffman, LLC. He received his law degree from Washington University School of Law in 1990, and he is in Chicago. He's a member of the Illinois State Bar Association, the Chicago Bar Association, the Illinois Trial Lawyers Association. He's co-chair of the Chicago Bar Association Solo and Small Practice Committee, and has been involved in the leadership of that committee since the mid-90s. He sits on the CBA Judicial Evaluation Committee and is an endorsed member of the Better Business Bureau. Since 1996, he has been a chair-eligible Cook County arbitrator. Prior to attending law school, he went to Indiana University. Our last two panelists are with Lord Companies, LLC. Keith Lord is the president and managing broker of the Lord Companies, LLC, a diversified real estate corporation with consulting, brokerage, and development divisions, specializing in urban infill and adaptive reuse brokerage, design, and development. In 2017, Cranes awarded him one of the most influential commercial real estate brokers in the Chicago metropolitan area. Mr. Lord has been the president of the Retail Brokers Network, which has over 65 independent commercial retail real estate offices nationwide. Gina Caruso is a licensed broker with the Lord Companies. She brings a unique understanding of business districts with a proven track record of results from her background in economic development, urban planning, real estate, and small business. Gina also worked with the mayor's office of the city of Chicago. As a certified urban planner and licensed real estate broker, she specializes in neighborhood economic development and leverages her referral network to support the success of her clients, which include municipalities, landlords, and tenants. Gina brings a unique perspective to her projects with her blend of public sector, urban planning, and private sector real estate experience. So I want to welcome and thank all of the panelists for participating. Each of our panelists will share their perspectives with you for about 15 minutes. Then we will open up for the platform. Again, please use the Q&A icon at the bottom. Thank you to our esteemed panel, and thank you for those participating. Michael, please begin.
Thank you, Caroline, and thanks everybody for attending. It's funny in the, everybody might say this, but I think in the practice of employment in particular, I feel like we've been on the front lines with this COVID-19 issue as we've partnered with our clients to work through, how businesses can deal with this evolving and fluid situation. Whether we were dealing with the shutdown orders that were, disparate across the country, maybe even disparate across states, and then now the reopening plans and rollouts that are occurring again disparately across the country and in some cases across the states. What I'd like to talk about are a couple of the early requirements that were imposed on employers with regard to extending the FMLA protections, as well as some paid sick leave provisions that were promulgated in connection with one of the early stimulus packages regarding COVID. So, if you're not aware, the Families First FFCRA package required certain employers, basically employers that have 500 or fewer employees, to provide certain of these benefits that are listed here on this slide. And I don't want to get into great detail because we only have 15 minutes, but suffice it to say there are some new requirements that need to be considered, particularly now that companies are facing the prospect of reopening and getting their employees to transition from a purely telecommuting role to a boots on the ground return to work role. And so be mindful of these new requirements. One of the interesting things to note here is that the documentation requirements are about what you would expect. Employees will request the leave, and the employers will process the leave based on one or more of the qualifying reasons. So I encourage my clients, and certainly encourage anybody participating on this discussion, to consider whether their policies need to be updated to accommodate for these benefits, as well as any requests for the benefits. The other thing that came out of the stimulus package was the CARES Act, most notably the programs that support businesses who are struggling amid the COVID-19 situation and continue to struggle amid the COVID-19 situation. I think the most notable programs is the PPP program, the Paycheck Protection Program. As you can see here, just by way of high-level summary, there's some payroll formula for the benefits under the program that provided that companies utilize the proceeds of their PPP loan for payroll, rent, and utilities as authorized by the program. The principal amount that was borrowed can be forgiven, subject to certain requirements. And so, one of the things that companies often ask in these situations is, is this a way for us to obtain funds to help us sort of weather the storm, if you will, in dealing with the impacts of COVID-19? And I think it's a very individualized assessment, and it's really company specific. But overall, the high level things to think about here are the max loan amount, which is basically 2.5x of a monthly payroll that would run in one of two periods, either the period from February 15th of 2019 through June 30th of 2019, or essentially the first quarter of 2020. And so that's what the calculation would involve when calculating the loan size that a company would be eligible for. When deciding eligibility and calculating that, as you can see on the left-hand side, these are the eligibility requirements for the PPP. I won't really belabor the point because you can see them here on the slides, but there are some particular allowances here for companies that want to continue to fund contributions to retirement plans. There is an allowance for example, if companies need to separate with an employee, and provide a separation or severance benefits, there's a provision for that. And I think one of the most noteworthy things on this slide is, and folks, are sometimes taken aback by this, is that independent contractors and sole proprietors are also eligible to seek these benefits. And so it's something to consider if you're a small business or even a sole proprietor. But of course, there are some costs that are not eligible, as you can see on the right-hand side. So how do we spend these funds once we're approved, once we run the gauntlet of applying for them and that there are funds to be applied? We no doubt heard that the first tranche of these funds was quickly exhausted. And there was a second tranche that was approved. I'm not sure exactly where we stand at this moment in time, but I think there continue to be funds available. But the allowable uses are for payroll. So really trying to continue payroll for employees, continue coverage under health plans, utilities, rent. One of the things to be aware of is a lot of these obligations, at least as relates to rent and utilities, these have to have been accrued and paid during the covered period. So really the 10-week period after the loan was issued and the proceeds were received. So that's something to be really mindful of. One of the great aspects of the PPP program is the forgiveness potential. And we've just seen some recent guidance from the SBA on forgiveness, but suffice it to say that if a company holds true to the requirements and utilizes the funds as required, 75% for payroll costs, 25% for the other costs like utilities and rent, then the principal should be forgiven. We encourage companies to document their utilization of the funds. I, for one, have advised clients to open a separate bank account to house their PPP funds so they can be segregated from other funds, so to establish the flow from the receipt of funds to utilization for purposes of proving forgiveness. Other considerations that we've had to deal with, not surprisingly, because of the shutdowns where restaurants are closed, hotels are closed, travel is completely shut down. Companies have had to consider furloughing employees and or laying off employees. One of the interesting things in this situation with COVID, in the furlough context, employees are eligible for unemployment under the state programs, the specific state programs, as well as under the federal program. So one of the things that the CARES Act provided was extended unemployment benefits from the federal government. And so, if a company is in need of cost cutting, and one of the cost cutting measures involves overhead related to employees, a furlough is a reasonable approach to take to achieve that cost cutting, but as well to allow for employees to continue to receive benefits and receive unemployment. So that's something to definitely think about. Of course, if furloughing is not an option, then you turn to a layoff or reduction in force, but be aware that when that happens, you open the possibility of receiving claims from the employees for discrimination or retaliatory discharge or the like. Unemployment considerations, and this is something that'll be interesting, and certainly love to hear from Neil on this one. We had a question during a prior presentation around the entitlement, or rather the eligibility of foreign nationals to receive unemployment benefits. I'll certainly defer to Neil on that, but I think overall what we're seeing is when you pair the state benefits with the federal benefits that are afforded under the CARES Act, this really provides a robust mechanism for employees to continue to receive some salary continuation and some wage continuation to help them weather the storm. Anecdotally, there are stories of employees who seem to be doing better from a pay standpoint by being on unemployment versus by coming back to work. But I think at the end of the day, these benefits are finite in nature, and they're finite by either A, the liquidity of the program that are providing the benefits, or B, the time period for which they can be sought. Another helpful tool in the company and employer toolbox is the payroll deferral. Certain tax, the employer's portion of Social Security tax can be deferred 50% up to December 31st of 2021, and the other 50% to December 31st of 2022. This is yet another mechanism for employers to consider, but please note that it's kind of an either or, PPP or tax deferral. It's not both. So that's something to strategically think through with the finance department and the comptroller and the like to figure out what's going to be the most effective. As we reopened the workforce, reopened the country, we're certainly seeing a lot of questions from companies around safety. One of the things to note here, and I just had a conversation about this last night, OSHA, the federal regulatory body that oversees workplace safety, actually has stated in its guidance for preparing workplaces for COVID-19 that the hazard of COVID-19 is simply impossible to mitigate at this point. In other words, unlike mitigating an electrical hazard or a fire hazard or something like that you can see, with COVID you can't see it, and so that's why companies are utilizing what's called a hierarchy of controls to protect against those things, either by increasing temporary work from home, providing sick leave, creating, installing plexiglass barriers between cubicles, using face masks and the like. But one of the components here is testing. The EEOC has said that employers can test, but of course, be careful what you wish for. If you test, you likely receive other information that maybe you weren't seeking, and certainly you have to recall that there's a confidentiality requirement to the information that's received. One of the final things I'll talk to is the reluctant employee, which has happened and will continue to happen as we start to reopen and get folks trying to get back to work. There's going to be employees who are concerned about the safety of going back to work, and so I think the best we can do is follow the guidance, whether it's from the CDC or OSHA. Make sure we're doing, being as diligent and vigilant as we can. And I think, one of the things we need to impress upon employees is this is not a political issue like we hear in the news with masks and whatnot. This is absolute safety. There can be no room for disputes on these things. And so if you decide you want to use a face mask, use a face mask. And so with that, I think I'll turn it back over, and thanks everybody for your time. I think that's Neil's up next.
Okay. All right. That was a great presentation, Michael, and I was even taking notes because it was really quite fascinating. Hello, everyone. Neil Weinrib, Neil Weinrib and Associates, also known as NALA. We're a nationwide immigration firm working within the U.S. and abroad, helping foreign nationals achieve the American dream. Prior to the lecture today, of course, as often happens in immigration, so many things happened in the last 24 hours that I decided to quickly supplement some of the points that are going to be covered in the outline. And I just want to run through a few points as sort of a preface. Basically, there are estimated over 14.3 million illegal immigrants in the US, and more than 40 million were actually born abroad. We hear a lot of talk about the H-1B visas and their impact on the US workforce and economy, but H-1 visa holders really only make up 1% of the entire US workforce. So it's quite magnified well beyond their actual presence. Just a couple of quick things that have come up in the news. The US is now planning to cancel student visas involving many Chinese nationals and expel them, actually. About 3,000 are suspected of being spies for the People's Republic. There are about 360,000 Chinese students here in the US on F1 student visas. And apparently the State Department is now chasing potential Chinese spies and looking to expel them from the US. We've never seen anything like that before, so it's certainly a novel phenomenon. Recently, we've been experiencing, and our clients have been experiencing, delays with both USCIS and various government bodies involved in immigration. And budget cuts are expected because immigration is self-funding based on the application fees generated by people seeking immigration benefits. And they are actually running out of money because of the tightening restrictions by the Trump administration, increases involving the ability to support your foreign national relative and things like that. So it created a drastic reduction in applications, and therefore application fees have dipped considerably. How that's going to affect immigration remains to be seen, but we expect either delays or reduced staffing and an increase in immigration filing fees, of course. Now, and this will be across the country. We recently learned that the Board of Immigration Appeals, which handles appeals of immigration decisions involving the immigration court system throughout the US, many of the members of the board are being former appointees by the Obama administration, are being asked to resign or retire, and they're being offered benefit packages as the federal government tries to reshape the scope and direction of the Board of Immigration Appeals at this time. They're trying to bring on far more conservative judges and change the complexion of the judiciary. And it's very important because they handle all the appeals. Many green card holders are afraid to travel abroad right now, fearful they won't be able to return to the US. I get inquiries like that on a daily basis. And also, apropos to what Michael was talking about, many of our foreign national clients and potential green card applicants are afraid to accept any sort of stimulus money or even unemployment benefits, believing it will harm or damage their future immigration objectives. That's a query that comes up all the time. Now, the good news is that immigration does plan to resume premium rush processing in the next few weeks. That's one of the positives. Basically, we've got the executive order that came out back in April, and it fortunately was somewhat restrictive, but can be reviewed every 30 days. So we're waiting to see what will happen with that. There is a push within many people in government to try to certainly protect the U.S. workforce. And to that end, there are various bills that have been introduced into Congress that would make it perhaps more challenging for companies to hire foreign workers. Even though, as I mentioned, H-1B workers only make up 1% of the workforce, their presence has been tremendously magnified, as if they're a far greater presence. We're experiencing, again, a number of issues that have come up. We have people obviously still interested in seeking working visas. We have a large number of layoff situations. Many of our H-1B clients have been furloughed and laid off, and they're dealing with, again, unemployment related claims and issues and eligibility. The problem with a lot of H-1B visa holders in general is that they're tied to a specific employer, therefore they're not free to work anywhere. Hence, they're not eligible for unemployment benefits, unfortunately. And as I mentioned, the H-1B is the basic visa or working visa for foreign nationals, and it's the one that gets the most press and news. This year, there was a tremendous demand for H-1B visas prior to the start of COVID, and there are 85,000 available annually, and the demand is huge. As I said, though, H-1B visa holders are far magnified in terms of the actual number in our workforce, but many companies and even government agencies rely on H-1B visa employment. And the majority of those come from India and to a lesser degree, China. That's still the visa du jour. It's the basic working visa for most foreign nationals. And it requires a US company to act as a sponsor. So it is sponsor specific. An H-1B visa holder is not free to simply transfer. They must be sponsored by another company. And lately, many of them have been furloughed. And that's raised additional issues in terms of working from home, which is definitely achievable within the geographical area of the employer without them having to file for any amendment of the H-1. But many, or if not most of our H-1B workers have been working remotely. And that's been a big issue that's come up as a result of COVID. Right now, immigration is fielding the H-1B visas for this upcoming fiscal year. We're still within the application period. Registration was handled differently this year with a preliminary registration period in March. And those selected out of the 85,000, including 20,000 allocated to US master's advanced degrees, are now going through a selection process that is just starting to take place with applications, again, now going through immigration between April and May. And we shall see how that transpires. As I mentioned, there have been bills introduced into Congress to add restrictions to H-1B workers, including one bill proposed a minimum salary, what's called a level 4 salary of about $245,000, which would knock out a lot of H-1B workers. And again, that's a bill that was just introduced into Congress last week. Various visas, as I mentioned, are available. Companies that seek to transfer personnel would use an L1 intra-company transfer visa. And that's been a very popular visa for executives, managers, or people with very special knowledge of their company's products or processes. must have 1 year experience abroad to qualify. We're seeing, again, what I've seen recently is an increased demand amongst our foreign nationals as COVID is starting to wane to some degree. I'm getting much more, I would say, many more inquiries in terms of potential visas, including E2 investment visas and various other vehicles for people who have entrepreneurial desires to set up a US business. The E2 investment visa has been one of the most popular vehicles if you're from one of the qualifying countries. And as I mentioned, the L1 has been a very popular visa for both large and small companies. We have seen that immigration certainly favors US companies over foreign companies. In terms of approvability for H-1B visas, the approvability for US employers is far higher than it is for overseas companies with US offices. And recently a lawsuit was just settled involving H-1B employees because there had been a tremendous issue involving what's called third-party placement, especially computer companies that place analysts at off-site, and the government has just conceded in a settlement to permit third-party placement. Once again, it had gone through a number of challenges recently. In dealing with immigration, I should say, we're dealing with an administrative agency where we're not allowed to speak with them. There's no one-on-one contact as there would be, for example, if you were dealing with IRS or other federal agencies. Everything we do is based on document submission, written submission within applications. So there's no, we have no opportunity to really confer with an immigration officer examiner. And that's what makes our field so challenging. Everything really depends on the document submission. And it's on any given day, an officer at immigration may be reviewing a doctor, a lawyer, a scientist, an accountant, any number of occupations, an artist perhaps, a cook or chef. And it makes our job so much more challenging in that respect and for our foreign national clients. But what we are seeing in terms of COVID-19 is that, unfortunately, is that foreign nationals are being scapegoated for COVID-19, not just from China, but throughout the world. And so there's a little bit of an immigration backlash going on now across the country, which is unfortunate. Immigrants have always been the backbone of America and have been major contributors. And so it remains to be seen. Unfortunately, as I said, they've been scapegoated by many people in the government as less desirable now that so many Americans are out of work and unemployed. But immigrants have been known to be extremely hardworking, and they've been the backbone of America, whether it's farming, healthcare, service industries, and many others. This country would not be where it is without foreign nationals, including my ancestors and grandparents and probably most of us. They came to America seeking a better life, and they've been tremendous contributors to our country. So hopefully that backlash will be reversed sometime soon as COVID starts to disappear. But it's foreign nationals have been unfairly targeted, unfortunately. But yet again, the American dream lives on. The interest in coming to America is still tremendous because as bad as it is here, it's far worse in many other countries. And people see America as a land of opportunity, both for investment and for employment and rights, general rights. For women who come from oppressed countries like Turkey and the Middle East, America represents freedom for them and for many people of different persuasions. And that's what we're all about. And we're just waiting for this, the COVID-19 cloud to pass. And we're confident that we're going to see a spike in people seeking to come to the US once this is passed. And I pretty much have flown through a lot of material, and my outline pretty much covers a lot of the key points we've been seeing. Recent travel restrictions for Brazil And we're waiting to see if the executive order of April 23rd will be extended or modified. So we're following that very closely. You know, immigration differs from other areas of law in that where we've got a political element attached to immigration, which is a component that's very difficult to gauge because it shifts constantly. Whereas other areas of law have greater stability, immigration has that political component that affects it on a constant basis, especially during this current administration. You've heard about what's going on with people who are detained, even with COVID-19, parents separated from their children, these various situations that are going on around the country. There is still a huge number of people in detention. There are over 65,000 people who are forced to remain in Mexico under the Remain in Mexico policy. Many people have been removed. COVID-19 has been a very convenient excuse for the government to not admit people into the United States. And it will probably continue that way for a while. But it's really had a chilling effect on the entire asylum world, unfortunately.
Absolutely.
That's
Neil,
the collateral damage.
Neil, it's a wonderful presentation and very, very sad. We do want to talk to Stephen about workers' compensation. So thank you so much. And Stephen, please.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen and give me a moment. And can everyone see my screen? Is it up and going? There we go. Okay, so many of you remember this old Aflac commercial with now deceased Yogi Berra. If you get hurt, you miss work, it won't hurt to miss work. Well, even though that was about disability insurance, it's essentially what workers' comp is created to help. 120 years ago, you got hurt at work, your leg got chopped off. It was like, have a nice life, and too bad. So the system that we came up with in Illinois and most other places is what we call the grand bargain. In exchange for bargaining away some of the things that you would get in a typical lawsuit, such as pain and suffering, loss of a normal life, lost wages, that type of thing, we have more or less fixed damages based on body part, injury, type of disability, and job description. This is a little bit about me. Carolyn already said that, and again, thank you to Richard Pena and Carolyn for putting this all together, and I appreciate it. The key part of my biography is I like to say that I'm allowed to share space with my wife, dog, and cat because I am probably the most annoying roommate since I office from home, something that we're all doing now. Workers' comp, at least in Illinois, and this varies from state to state, but for the most part, in a nutshell, if you get hurt doing what you're supposed to be doing, you know, the magic languages arising out of and in the course of, but basically if you're doing your job. So for example, if you're a truck driver and you're unloading and your job is to unload and you hurt your back, you're covered. Now, if you're a supervisor and the supervisor is supposed to just sit on a chair and supervise, and the supervisor decides that he or she is going to lift the 80-pound box and hurts his or her back, that may or may not be covered. And one of the things we find continually is that employers, often to save money on their workers' comp insurance, will not classify, especially older, more expensive employees, as what they actually do. They will be quote unquote supervisors rather than actual workers. But basically, if you report it to your employer within 45 days, obviously they can rebut that. If they've got video of you hurting yourself sailing or hunting turkey or whatever it is, they can introduce that. But basically, you've got 3 years to file, and there's no filing fee, so it's very easy to file, which means we have a lot of cases. The part of the grand bargain we talked about is that workers' compensation is your exclusive remedy. You're hurt at work doing what you're supposed to be doing. That's your only avenue of recompense against your employer. Now, There are some very, very limited cases where, let's say you are a traveling salesperson and you are traveling between hospitals where you sell medical equipment. You get rear-ended by someone who is looking down at their phone and negligent. Well, you would have both a workers' compensation case against your employer and a personal injury case against the negligent party. Now that gets very complicated as far as how much you have to repay in liens, because you don't get money from both parties and get to keep it all. It's not quite like that. But for the most part, those would be the cases where you have two cases in one. But what happens if your employer clearly does something terribly negligent? Is your only avenue workers' comp? Most of the time, yes, unless you can prove that the workers' compensation and the employer has some sort of other capacity, like they own the property where you slipped and fell or something like that. At any rate, one of the things that we are going to be seeing in the future, and I already know there's some chatter on the listserv this morning, what to do about cases where employers are not properly providing PPE, enforcing social distancing, or giving employees enough safety. For example, I had an inquiry yesterday about a potential client who was taking temperatures for his co-employees and caught COVID. Is that covered? Well, we're going to get to that in a little bit. Now, workers' comp in Illinois is still basically paper-based and personal. It's very behind the times. While I use carbon paper in the circuit court, workers' comp is almost as bad, if not worse, in that you literally cannot settle a case and submit contracts by email. You have to mail the contracts in, or you have to bring the contracts in. In one case, I literally waited 6 hours for a 25-minute trial. In another case, I settled the case, submitted the contracts, got them approved, and no one can find the contracts, and it took 2 months to convince the carrier to pay out on what was clearly an approved settlement. So they are trying to work to become more paperless. That was in the process. The wheels were turning very slowly right before everything hit. We're still going to be on a wait and see basis. At this point, the Workers' Comp Commission has so far indicated not much willingness to change the ways that they do things, but we're going to get to that. The new way, they've made some provisions. You're allowed, if you've got, let's say your employer is not paying medical or is not paying TTD, you can have an emergency hearing, but it's still, you have to show up in person. It's not quite that easy. They're going to be doing some calls, some of the court calls online by WebEx or similar, but trials are still to be held in person, which means you have to provide PPE for yourself, for your client, for any witnesses, and you've got to take an elevator in a building in most cases to make sure that you are somehow protected. And still, there's no guarantee. You're going to have to use the bathroom. You know that it's a state building. They're not going to be sanitizing surfaces. So it's a little bit concerning to me at this point, and no one really knows. Now, we did try and fail, and now we're trying again in Illinois to create what's called a rebuttable presumption, meaning that if a frontline worker, and a frontline worker is essentially someone who is either a police officer or a fire person, or a person working at an essential business like a grocery store or a laundromat, and they get COVID, there's a rebuttable presumption that they would be covered under workers' compensation. Of course, industry and trade groups, seeing that this could be a potential rabbit hole of liability, filed for an injunction, and were promptly granted one in downstate Illinois. The Illinois Workers' Comp Commission promptly withdrew this emergency rule. They are now trying to do the same thing legislatively. As of this point, we don't know if it's going to pass or not. I would suspect it will, but I also suspect it will be bogged down in court for a while. So as I said, as of this writing this very morning, the chatter on the listserv was, what are we going to do whether there is or is not a presumption? and how are we going to prove these cases, and let's get our act together as petitioners attorneys. Now, obviously, the other side, respondents attorneys, are going to be figuring out ways to exclude this or figure out ways that they can cover themselves. Like, what do they have to do to make sure that they're safe? This slide pretty much just gives you a general understanding of what our governor has done as far as segregating the state into different areas and giving different businesses different priority to open. The joke here is that someone pointed out that both laundromats and lawyers were essential businesses. So I guess we're in a pretty select company. One other avenue that's kind of being explored, and again, I'm going to defer to people who do these all the time, but business interruption claims. So if you own a business and you can't open because A, you're afraid of COVID, or B, 2 or 3 of your employees are infected, or C, the government has told you you are not an essential business, you cannot open. Well, do you have insurance that would cover that? Now, most of these business interruption policies are all risk, meaning they cover all risks. However, the key word is usually says something about direct physical loss or damage to property. Now, direct damage or loss to physical property, pretty easy. You got smoke clouds or toxic fumes. Some of you may know about Sterigenics, the polluter that uses toxic substances to sterilize medical equipment. Well, they've been in some legal trouble because of that, because people are tending to get cancer or die from that. You can understand if there's a wildfire near your house or business, why that might inconvenience you and probably leave you unoccupied. Same thing if a tree falls on your house. But what about viruses? We don't know. It depends on what your policy says, because most policies will have some sort of an exclusion, and this is where it gets interesting, of either a virus or a contaminant, or in this case, an order of civil authority by a governor or a mayor, or, well, I suppose presumably a president, but that's not going to happen. So read your policy and obviously consult a professional, because you're not going to be able to figure it out on your own. What do we do here as far as weighing employee versus employer rights? I represent employees, but I also understand as an employer that this is kind of a difficult balancing test. You don't want to just say, oh, everyone should be able to just stay at home and get paid, because that's obviously financially ridiculous. And you don't want to just say, well, everyone should just come back to work right away so that we can function. That's not going to work. I suspect, and I would defer to definitely Michael on this, that there's going to be a lot of questions now about, do I have a right to work from home? Absolute right to work from home. Or if I have a special needs child who is more at risk, or an elderly mother that I take care of, can I work from home so I don't catch it? That's going to be your future as far as employment law. As far as what does the employer have to do? Well, you're going to have, the government rules pretty much have said, you've got to provide PPE, you've got to ensure that your customers are using PPE, you have to create enough spacing between customers and various other things. But at some point, we're going to have to figure out what do you have to do, and can you be sued if you don't do that? And so I know there is a talk of a case against McDonald's, for example, by some employees who claim that worker safety was not being taken seriously, they were not being provided PPE, and they were not being given enough social distance. That's going to be interesting. Keep in mind that in Illinois and in most other places, you are, unless you have a written contract, you're an at-will employee, and you can be fired for any or no reason. As of this writing, June 3rd is when Chicago reopens. That means that restaurants and bars and non-essential businesses can start having customers in there. The biggest problem we're going to have is, how do you enforce it all? And if you're a small little restaurant, you don't have an outdoor seating area, can you apply for a license very quickly to have people sitting out on the street? One of the things that I would say is most important here is that obviously workers' comp is not going to cover everything, and it may not cover COVID-19, coronavirus is not necessarily covered under your business interruption insurance. And for now, as far as I can see from both sides, if you're an employee or an employer, the best thing you can do is follow whatever your state and local rules are. So if you are an employee, the smartest thing to do would be have your PPE, buy masks, sanitize, wash your hands, be smart, and basically document any time that your employer asks you to do something that you don't think is fair or within the rules. If you're an employer, best thing you can do is make sure you have stuff, PPE, to hand out to customers. If you own a restaurant and you're opening back up, you darn well better have masks to give out to people or be ready to turn people away at the door. So following the state and local rules would probably be the best practice at this point. Again, I'd defer to Michael on that. So I am happy to take any questions at the end. Thank you for having me. And one last slide. This is just a ridiculous picture of a ridiculous looking middle-aged man riding a time trial bike and a really silly looking onesie. So I like to say I've been fast tracking your legal claims since 1990, and I thank you for having me.
Thank you. Very important information. Great presentation. Keith and Gina, please begin.
Thank you, guys. And boy, the previous presenters were absolutely fantastic. I think I have a page and a half of notes so far. Gina and I are very excited to be with you today. We're going to talk about two things and from two different perspectives, one from the tenant perspective and one from the landlord perspective. And the two topics are preparing to reopen and opening, and then going forward, a crisis management plan and what happens in the fall if this all starts coming back. So I'm going to turn it over to Gina. Let's talk about reopening and opening from the tenant point of view.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you for this opportunity to be with you all today. So in terms of the reopen and opening strategy for tenants, really the main priority for tenants, of course, as we've heard from our other panelists, is the public health and safety aspect and how that's going to impact the reformatting of tenants' spaces, not only to be compliant with social distancing rules, think restaurants that have to reduce the number of seats, but also how to create an inviting in-store experience when you have the new post-COVID consumer who's going to be very cautious about where they go and will want assurances from retailers that public health is a priority. And that ties into the business marketing. We're seeing a total game changer for retailers in particular. No longer can you build it and they will walk in your front door. Communication is key with your customer, not only to your current customers, but to new customers. That you are open, when you are open. We're seeing cities across the nation coordinate with their public transit systems to stagger business hours. So that will spill over into the staggering of public transit ridership. So we're all in this together notion will have a very systemic play here beyond just the business hours of a business. Also, you may have heard the term omnichannel marketing. Again, no longer can you rely on a customer to walk through your front door and have a customer that way. You need to touch them in many different ways that they want to be touched, be it on their mobile device, social media interaction, e-blasts, a seamless online shopping experience. We saw massive upticks in delivery, pickup, and online sales during this most recent crisis. That's now going to be the new normal for consumers. And also to leveraging business associations, business improvement districts throughout the United States are a really good broker between the government, property owners, and tenants in terms of this new play we have on managing the public space. We're seeing the emergence of what are called streeteries, where, again, with restaurants having a lot less customers in their store are looking to the outdoors, public cafes and so forth, in order to have the social distancing met and still have their customer base. We're going to see a new use of delivery on loading zones. No longer is it for the delivery truck to drop off product. That's now for pickup, delivery, etc. In Chicago in particular, the Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection that does the permitting and licensing of the public way are definitely taking a hard look at those public way use permits and having more leniency and changes in the use of the public way. And then adjusting the product line. You know, we saw, and maybe you were customers of restaurants as an example, that changed from going to a restaurant to have a meal to actually being your local grocery and selling, you know, the steaks, steakhouses were selling steaks, to bring home and so forth. So really for these tenants to be nimble as far as switching up their product line to meet the needs of the new consumer. Distribution is also a huge aspect. We saw a lot of disruptions in the distribution systems and changes in the way that people were getting product. Obviously, a reduction in the in-store experience is going to stay with us. It's going to take a lot more for that retailer to get a consumer to walk in their store. So putting more of an emphasis on pickup and delivery options and those online sales. So tenants are really going to need to look at these different delivery systems. Keith will speak more to how that will relate from the landlord perspective. And then lastly, those channels for product availability. You know, think Egg McMuffin and all those components that go in, the egg, the ham, the chicken that lays those eggs, etc. Well, we saw massive disruptions, for example, in the meat industry and getting that product distributed to restaurants as an example. So tenants are going to have to look at their product lines and be able to either change products or have different distribution channels for their inputs. So I'm going to pass it over to Keith, who will speak more from the landlord perspective.
Okay, as we talk about landlords, the first thing that a landlord needs to do is to figure out who's not coming back. And it's time to get on the phone. If you don't already know, is J. Crew coming back? Is Hertz coming back? Art Van Furniture? No, they're not. You need to figure out what tenants are coming back, talk to them. When are they opening? How are they opening? And get on board of what is happening with the tenants. Then the next thing that landlords must do is make it known what the landlord is doing. You got to let your tenants know, the tenants' invitees, the tenants' customers. What is the landlord doing with their buildings to address the common areas, elevators, stairwells, lobbies, trash removal, HVAC? You got to let the tenants know that it's safe to bring their people, invitees, and their employees back. You have to get that communicated to the tenants. Amazon is running an ad right now. It's absolutely wonderful. It's showing their employees in masks and gloves and how they're handling their packages cleanly, so it's safe to order from Amazon and get that to your door. All tenants that have any type of service need to explain this to their customers. So do the landlords. Building environment, it's really important to figure out, what do you have? What does your site have? You're going to need to change things. There's going to be new public ways. Look for underutilized pieces of your building. It could be lower levels, parking lots that you could now use for different tenant uses. We talked to a couple sports clubs. They're worried right now about opening and spreading out their equipment because one of them said, well, we have 400 pieces of equipment in a club. We have no place to put half the equipment if we take it out. Well, that landlord's got to get on the phone and say, hey, I got a basement, store it down there. Or if you're an office landlord, I can put extra desks. Tenants are going to have to spread out. Sanitation, it's very important to talk about what you're going to do as a landlord. Parking, you got to really rethink parking ratios. Parking is going to be one of the biggest benefits for all retailers and office because you can do a lot of things with a parking lot that you may not have done before. For a good example, for grocery stores, Home Depot and Walmart are all talking about redoing their lots and having multiple drive-through lanes where you can order online, pay online. You go into a drive-through lane, very similar to what you'd see at in front of a hotel in Las Vegas. And somebody runs out and puts what you just purchased in the trunk of your car and you drive away. The touchless type of delivery of consumer products. Communication, we talked about it. There's still funds. People can still apply for PPP and other funds. Tell your tenants, help your tenants know what's still available. Help them understand what sales incentives that they can produce. Help them with government authorities. Our speakers today have said, and they understand we need to double sidewalk space for restaurants. We need to look at recapturing valet parking and putting tables. We need to look at what California is doing, is taking parking spots in front of retailers and expanding the retailers into the street. That's really important to talk to different authorities of what we can do, and then push them to say, hey, we need licenses now. We need temporary licenses. We need to restaurants, again, selling liquor out of restaurants. Olive Garden, you can get a bottle of wine and go home with dinner. Bars are becoming packaged good liquor stores. They don't necessarily have the license to do it. They should apply for licenses, but landlords can pick up the phone, call their aldermen or call their mayors or village presidents and say, hey, this is what we're doing. It's illegal. Yeah, we understand that. We're going to apply for a temporary license to do it. But right now we're going to help our tenants and have them start doing it now. The other thing, you've got to be creative. Help the tenant to be creative. We have a development on the south suburb of Chicago where we're taking a vacant parking lot that used to be a Carson's box store, and we're going to make it a drive-in movie theater so that people can drive in from all around the region, pick up food from the local restaurants. That helps the tax base for the village. It helps the restaurants. Then they can go sit in the front hood of their car, and watch a big screen movie. We're advising that for restaurants that have outside space. It'd be kind of fun to have dinner and a movie. So again, these are just some of a few different things that you can do as a landlord to start helping your tenants get creative. We're also bringing architects now for our vacant restaurants, and we're paying for the architect to come in and take a look at social spacing because we want to maximize the number of seats that we can legally maximize for our restaurants. We want to help them make money, communicate with them, and get them open, and help them once they're open, figure out ways to maximize their business. Gina, I'm going to go back to you on crisis management moving forward.
Right. So as we know, sadly, there'll be the inevitable crisis that we will all have to prepare for. But what's not sad about that is we can get ahead of it, learn from what we all experienced from this last crisis, and be much more resilient and ready. The way Keith and I frame this is really in terms of a disaster playbook, both from the tenant and landlord perspective. From the tenant perspective, key again is communicating with your customers so you don't lose them, but you retain them through the next crisis. What is your message going to be about your brand and the expectation to connect with you as a business during the next crisis? Have that messaging ready. Staffing, we saw as an example, restaurants retaining their employees by shifting the waiters to delivery people. So how, think ahead, like if you had another crisis, how could you pivot your staff to different duties to retain them? IT, everything is so cloud-based now, making sure that, again, with that sort of digital connection you're going to have with customers and probably your vendors to make sure that your information technology is seamless. Keith will speak to this more, can't emphasize enough, especially with this group here of ABA, really understanding your lease terms, your insurance, and your financial plan. Will your lenders provide you lines of credit, deferment of payments, et cetera? Have those conversations now so that you're prepared for the inevitable next crisis. And then all the other logistics that would go into a reclosing. For customer loyalty, given that businesses need to know that omnichanneling is the name of the game, you will have multiple ways to connect with your customer and leverage that customer loyalty to generate sales while you're closed. If you're a type of business that cannot sell product when you're closed, we're seeing sales being pledged to businesses in the form of gift cards, et cetera, once they're reopened. So there's ways that you can continue cash flow while you're closed. Also, too, we're seeing a shift in how to connect this touchless experience. I think we all remember the time when a high touch experience was considered a gold standard as a consumer experience. Now the gold standard is a touchless experience. Chipotle is ramping up their Chipotle lanes where you have a completely touchless experience to get your favorite burrito bowl. I know we're running low on time here. I want to focus back on Keith from the landlord perspective on their disaster playbook. Keith?
Yeah, and I think it's important. We all got caught off guard, and if we get caught off guard on a resurgence of the pandemic or the virus and our ability to operate as a landlord, shame on us. So the playbook for landlords, yeah. What are you going to message to the tenants if this comes back? What are you going to do to explain to them what you're going to do as a landlord? Your call list, we talk about it. Make sure you have your contacts of all government authorities and who you need ready to go. Your business interruption insurance, time to check it. You got to take a look at that, as other presenters have discussed. But more importantly, reach out now to your banks. Find out what your financial institutions, find out what your insurance companies, find out what your equity lines are going to do if this comes back. Have an action plan now and know what your options are. Let's not get caught off guard for a second time. On tenant marketing and finances, we gave concessions to tenants. It's now their turn to give us regular marketing plans, what they're changing, what they're doing, so we know how to help them, and then financial reporting. We want to know in advance if tenants are opening, how much their money they're making, what is their gross volume, and are they going to survive the next 6 months as we are opening slowly. Leases, great time to clean up the leases, get rid of the REAs, or try to, if anything's obsolete, again, parking, circulation requirements, co-tenancy, site restrictions, all of those things need to go away, or at least be minimized so that you can change and adapt to the new tenant needs. Building modifications, we've talked about that. Tenants are going to increase in size, tenants are going to decrease in size. Make sure you know what space you have available. And if an office tenant needs more, be ready for it. If a restaurant needs more space, find it. Inside, outside, figure out solutions to help the tenants. We talked about, again, activating underutilized areas for the tenants, sports clubs, etc. We just got put on notice that there's a new office building coming to fruition in the West Loops, 12-story, 90,000 square feet. They are already to market as a COVID-19 new style of office building. They're going to have hand-free elevators, a disinfecting technology, a separate HVAC system for each floor. HVAC systems are going to be designed to minimize virus. They're going to be key fobs, so it'll be keyless building, private entrance off parking lots, solar powered faucets, soap dispensers, flush valves, totally different types of washrooms. So we're already starting to see landlords and developers get out in front and try to create a clean, healthy, safe place to work. And we're going to see this on both retail, office, and hotel tenants. And our last slide is just a little bit of humor. We were trying to figure out what type of tenants are going to have the hardest time coming back and reopening, as opposed to the safe office building. This is the one tenant that we found that we think is going to have a fairly difficult time because it combines two really problematic situations. And we hope they come back. We hope they do well, but it's probably a good time to rebrand the concept.
Thank you.
That's it on the landlord end. I'll pass it back to our moderator.
Thank you. Thank you. Great presentations. Thank you all. Before we start the questions, and I hope people out there will ask questions, I want to mention that as lawyers, one of the things that you can do is communicate. Communicate with your clients, just like we tell a tenant, if you're going to have problems paying the rent, communicate with your landlord. Communicate. Well-being checks are appreciated. And maybe someone will say, I never had a will. Maybe in the immigration area, people don't like to talk about having wills, but maybe this is the time that they need to have a will. The other thing that we're recommending is to have an emergency plan, something written out, and all the documents in one place. Whether you're a business, whether you're a family, there ought to be one place where everyone knows where you can get essential documents, where the bills have to go, if there are any kinds of information, leases, insurance policies, that all needs to go in one place where people can have access to it. So again, I'm going to call for questions. Right now, we don't have any. So I'm going to ask each panelist. And Keith, you and Gina touched on it a little bit. Oh, we do have one question. How do you motivate a landlord who is reticent to make changes to important systems like touchless elevators? I'm actually going to ask Stephen if you would respond to that.
Well, since it's a little bit outside of my area because I don't do landlord tenant, but I would think
Workers' comp, think workers' comp.
as in any area, vote with your feet. If you are a tenant and you are trying to motivate your landlord, you say, I really have other options here, and you damn well better believe that there's going to be landlords that are going to be getting ahead of the curve, like Keith mentioned and Gina mentioned. They're going to be providing these services. That's going to be the claim to fame. We've got segregated parking, or we've got touchless elevators. So I would think that's your motivation.
And if an employer refuses to make modifications, that could be the basis for a workers' comp situation if something goes wrong. Is that correct?
Possibly workers' comp. And the thing about COVID, at first we thought you get it and then you recover. So most of us in the workers' comp community thought, well, there's no real deficiency. So you're pretty much back where you were. There's no value to the case. Now that we're seeing things like strokes and circulatory problems and some other things, there may be some value to these cases long-term. Because workers' comp looks at the prism of, can you go back to work at your job? And obviously, if you work in a factory and you get COVID and you're 60 years old, you may not be able to go back to work. But in addition to that, there may be, like I talked about, the dual capacity doctrine. Perhaps there's also a failure to provide PPE or a failure to provide, social distancing or something like that. And that might be a growing type of lawsuit. So I would think smart employers are going to be providing that if they don't want to get a ton of these claims.
Keith, Gina, do you want to add something?
Yeah, we're telling all of our landlords and ourselves as landlords, we have to make changes. If we don't, we're going to lose tenants. I mean, it's just, it's like having a Class C office building and a Class A tenant. They're not coming to you. They're not going to renew. They're going to leave. The worst, landlord's job is to hold on to tenants that are paying rent that they want. And if they want to do that, got to make changes, and they got to start making them quickly. And that's really the reason is, here's what I'm doing as a landlord to help you and your invitees, tenants, and your customers keep operating and paying me rent. And if you're a tenant, you say, hey, look, you're getting behind the times. It's like having an elevator operator. Yeah, they're cute, but that's old.
Right. I would just build on that to simply say there's going to be a fork in the road between best practices and regulations, right? So it may be a choiceless choice ultimately for landlords to make a lot of these changes and, transferring from best practice to regulation.
I would just add to that pretty much what we saw, 100 years ago with trusts. It wasn't the radical government, doing these terrible trust busting things. It was more that the employers and the owners of companies saw that the government was going to do stuff, and then they more or less agreed to what the government ultimately did. So I think you'll probably see, like you just said, government kind of saying we could do this, and we are going to probably suggest this, and then businesses are going to realize that that's the way to build their brand as we're COVID safe, and also protect people and not get sued.
Hey, Caroline, I would just say one thing. I talked to a couple landlords this week. Very interestingly, they're trying to figure out how to redo their bathrooms like an airport, because nobody wants a door in a bathroom. Yep. So they got to go back and take a look at creating, the two walls, a little gauntlet L to go in. So it's one less touch point on men and women. So you can't see in, but you're not touching the bathroom door.
That'll be interesting.
Neil,
Caroline, I'm sorry.
If I could just add one thing, I think the plaintiff's lawyers have a tendency to provide a lot of motivation in this regard. If employers, landlords decide to put their heads in the sand, as it were, they'll be called out and fairly quickly. So I think the new normal requires new thinking, and I really appreciate how Keith and Gina laid that out. Let's get creative. Let's figure out a way to solve the problem versus continuing to perpetuate the problem.
Thank you. No, and I think also with people rethinking how they're going to be working and how they're going to be living, I think that absolutely is a requirement. Neil, if I can ask you, what do you think is going to happen? They're predicting this resurgence. How is that going to impact on immigrants in the immigration area, in your opinion? You have to unmute. You have to unmute the. You have to unmute the. There we go.
Oh, not yet.
Not yet. Oh, okay. But then, okay. Okay, well, Michael, maybe how do you see this playing out in the area while we ask Neil to unmute in the lower left-hand corner?
Yeah, I think that you know, as we start reopening the world and the globe, and here's Neil now. So let's listen in.
Okay, Neil.
Back to me.
We can hear you now. Yes, please.
Yeah, my apologies. In terms of the what context are you referring to in terms of?
How is this crisis, particularly if we have a resurgence, going to impact on immigration? You touched on that a little bit. If you
Sure.
can focus mostly on business, but if you want to talk about family-based, that would be fine too.
Sure. On the business side, it's wreaked havoc on employers in terms of foreign national employees working off-site, dealing with those issues that basically the immigration regulations were not designed for COVID-19 in terms of off-site employment to that degree. So it's been a game changer for U.S. immigration and the challenges that employers have had to deal with as a result of COVID. A lot of companies have downsized. A lot of foreign nationals are now looking for jobs, basically, and wondering what their options are because they don't want to go back to the home country. It's really will have quite an effect. As I mentioned, we get a lot of questions about layoff issues. How much time am I allowed in a layoff? Students who are hoping to get jobs and sponsored. The entire immigration model has been shaken by COVID-19, honestly. It's amazing. And, when you've been in practice for over 25 years, you think you've seen it all and suddenly you haven't. It's all brand new. So the challenges are coming up, but still, again, as bad as it is here in America, it's still better than many other places. So people still want to come here. So we are definitely going to be seeing quite a few challenges, in the next few weeks and months, especially now with the H-1 visas coming through selection. The issue will be whether there will be jobs for a lot of these foreign nationals. And if not, what are they going to do? For many of them, they don't want to go back to the home country. Opportunities are limited, especially for women who come here, fleeing societies that are male-centric. They really don't want to go back to Pakistan, Turkey, and Islamic countries where their rights are very limited. So.
And how do you imagine this is going to be taken care of in the area of family-based? I mean, we right now have and there are a lot of lawsuits on this, but right now, if you want to, that they've said basically immediate relatives, but not all immediate relatives.
Well, what happened in February, they raised the support requirement. They doubled the support requirement for a family of two from 22,000 to 42 to 44,000. So the income level to sponsor foreign national, courtesy of Washington, is now doubled as of February 24th. So it's harder now for people to be sponsored even through spouses. And that's why there's probably been a dip in family-sponsored immigration lately. And will continue.
So we have a question about, can a tenant require the landlord to give them a plan? From a legal point of view, I don't know of an Illinois law that requires that, but let's look at it from a business point of view also.
Yeah, and part of it and what we were doing with our tenants, they were coming to us for concessions. We had two requirements of certainly many other ones. We wanted to know whether they applied. We wanted to know how far down their business was. But we put into our agreements going forward two things. One is we want to know your marketing plan because we want to help you. We want to see it. You know, I'm not sure I can require it, but, you know, we're dealing with lots of different type, you know, in a sports club situation, we're dealing with 15 sports clubs. We know what 15 sports clubs are doing. We can help somebody with their plan. We can show them things that other tenants are doing that they may not be thinking of. They should want to give us a plan and allow us to help them. Their financials, of course, they don't want to give you their financials. And can we require them? If we made it part of our concession package, we're going to abate or defer rent for 2 months or 3 months, or have a slow startup, or redo your rent structure. Yeah, we want to see your monthly financials. And I got to tell you, across the board, they said fine.
Okay, so I think the key is that, you know, a mutual cooperation between whether it's employer, employee, landlord, tenant. I'm going to turn to Neil. Can we expect that from the government, that there's going to be some mutual cooperation between the government and businesses or individuals pursuing immigration applications?
Well, they have extended grace. I mean, believe it or not, the government was very slow to react to the COVID issue. And belatedly, they started extending grace periods for people who are out of status. One of the big issues are for those people who come here on the 90-day ESTA, where they're limited to a 90-day stay and they're trying to get back home, but they can't because their flights are delayed. We have all sorts of situations arising like that. But the government has been slow to react, but they're starting to become a little more flexible, I would say.
Okay.
That's the good news.
So, Michael, we have a question. Is anyone required, if you're on furlough, do you have to maintain insurance?
To maintain
Health
benefits,
insurance.
like
If
health insurance. Yeah, so that's going to be governed by the particular plan. You know, it's an hour of service requirements. You know, depends on how long the furlough goes, and if the furlough is tantamount to a termination of employment. So that's something that's going to be very fact specific. But generally speaking, I think employers are, the furlough option has been triggered in large measure to ensure, to the greatest extent possible, that benefits continue to be provided versus a reduction in force, where, you know, in many cases the benefits end at the end of the month during which the termination occurs.
Okay, so it really depends a lot on the situation. And what
my
about
favorite
people?
lawyer answer, it depends.
It depends.
I've got a question, because this has been coming up a lot. A lot of us have been working remotely, and I've observed from a lot of my colleagues and accountants that they're now leaning towards a remote work environment. Is that something we're going to be seeing?
Yeah, so I mean, really, that's employer specific, but yes, I think at least tentatively, many employers, certainly many of my clients, are considering, you know, extending work from home telecommuting. But to Keith's point, we definitely need to learn and be ready for what's next. You know, we quickly pivoted from on-site work to telecommuting work. And maybe we didn't have, you know, certain control measures in place. You know, telecommuting policies either need to be reviewed and or implemented to ensure that our employees are protecting confidential information, you know, through their Wi-Fi systems as they're transmitting information. You know, a lot of these laws that, you know, to Neil's point, you know, we weren't equipped to deal with, you know, everybody working from home. And, you know, that's not going to stop hackers from trying to penetrate systems, divert funds, divert paychecks, divert benefits, and the like. And so I think, you know, we need to be more vigilant than ever because the systems that we're working under now don't have all those IT protections in many cases. And so, you know, using VPNs, you know, I think also people working from home sort of get this sense of security that, well, you know, it's home, everything's fine. But it's actually, you know, the most likely place for things to happen. So just be mindful, I think.
Well, apropos to that, what happens when you start trying to bring employees back and they're making demands in terms of, is the building lobby going to be fogged and properly cleaned? Is the office environment going to be sanitized and all of that? I mean, it's raising a lot of collateral issues for employers.
Yeah, no,
right?
absolutely. And that's where, to Gina and Keith's point, the communication is key. Not only do the landlords need to communicate about these issues with their tenants, but the tenants, the employers and companies that are occupying those spaces need to in turn communicate with their employees and their potential visitors and invitees about what all the measures and all the steps that folks are taking. Because yes, there's going to be a high degree of reticence to come back. And I think it's just, it's going to be, there's a psychological issue, until we have a vaccine, these risks exist as soon as we walk out our front door. Maybe they even exist inside the house because we brought in a box from somewhere. And so I just think, it's going to be, people need to be hyper vigilant, but communication is going to be absolutely paramount to allay concerns, fears, etc.
I would just add quickly to that. Sorry, Carolyn.
I wanted you to talk.
Oh, okay. I was just going to add a quick thing on that is that I think there's going to be a lot. You just have to, as lawyers, especially, but as other business owners and business.
We just lost you. Stephen, we just lost you. And you're not muted and we.
Huh.
Okay, you're back.
Okay. So I was just going to make the point that lawyers especially, but other business owners and business hirees, you have to remember that when you're working from home or in a public place, you have to keep things confidential. You have to keep things secure. You have to remember to get like a password manager. You have to remember to get secure Wi-Fi, that type of thing, because that's the potential time bomb for lawyers is the ethical nightmare of how do you supervise people that you don't see? And also how do you keep your stuff secret from everyone else in your house? So just a couple of points on that, but go ahead.
If I may, there's always it's funny because with people working remotely, you have no control over their surfing the internet and potential virus issues. And I think that's something that's problematic too.
True.
There's no governance.
Well, if I could just add one thing, and we're wrestling with this with our own company, and Michael, you address this. Do you want the office building janitorial service coming into your office? We started talking and just thought, my God, they're going into 6 other offices before they get to us. We have no idea what they're bringing in. And do we want to start cleaning our own office and taking out our own trash? I mean, everybody's got to sit and figure out what's the best for them. I don't know that there's a perfect answer, and there probably isn't, but those are the things that landlords have to look at and tenants have to look at, because that's important. Our office doesn't want any janitorial service anymore. We'll do our own.
We have a question. When disinfecting offices, how would you handle concerns about the toxicity of the disinfectants being used and being exposed to these toxic chemicals contained in the spray that is being used all over the office? Masks don't prevent the smell of the chemicals. How would you respond to that? I'm going to look at Stephen.
Okay.
Okay, you're using a disinfectant. The janitorial service in your building uses a disinfectant that makes someone ill.
I think you're going to have that's kind of a Michael question for employment, but that is definitely something where you could clearly see someone's going to complain. They're going to say it makes me sick. It's the same scenario, I think, as when someone wears a noxious perfume that allegedly makes people sick, or when they're allergic to certain substances, or they're allergic to peanuts and you can't have peanuts in the company refrigerator. So I would think it would be handled similarly to that. My janitorial staff, meaning my wife and I, we do not use toxic substances because we got a dog and a cat. So that's
Michael. Michael, thank you.
No, I think we would look at this sort of under the normal OSHA directives. If there's going to be some exposure to toxic chemicals, we're going to need to have access to the material documents that include all the contaminants and what the exposure potential is. I think this sort of goes back to Keith's point about are we can we or do we want to, as an employer or a tenant, punt these responsibilities to a third party, and, about whom we don't, know or understand what their controls are, what their safety measures are in place, and come in and spray the stuff versus us doing it ourselves. I think, that's really honestly is a evolving issue, very fluid. It's a really mixed bag right now. I think in some measure, employers are deciding if they have the responsibility, they're going to take it upon themselves, and so maybe they're going to be disinfecting communal areas and the like, or it may be suspending use of communal areas. If you can't wipe down the coffee pot every time it's used, or you can't wipe down the water dispenser or ice dispenser, then you just don't use it. And people are bringing in their own water, people are bringing in their own coffee. So that's part of the pivot and change that's happening to, because we don't have good answers for these questions right now. We're learning on the go.
We sort of do in Illinois, and that is they're done. The communal areas, the coffee, anything that multiple people would touch, that's disappearing. So in Illinois and Chicago, Illinois, that's going. I don't know about other jurisdictions, but it's going. Neil, one of the questions that I'm getting from a lot of people is that who is eligible for unemployment?
Correct.
If we
That's
could
a big,
just,
and it varies from state to state. And even here within New York, we're getting differing interpretations. It's amazing. We've had people apply and they were told that they have to show 2 years work permission, even if they've been married to an American for a year and they've got a work permit. We've seen so many variations from the state unemployment offices. But generally speaking, for example, H-1B workers are not eligible for unemployment because, again, their employment is tied to one specific employer. They're not free to migrate to another employer without sponsorship. So all the H-1Bs are pretty much out of luck. But again, even with other people, as I said, if they're married to Americans, there's no guarantee they're going to get unemployment either. We haven't seen a consistent policy in New York. It's been very, very haphazard. But many other foreign nationals are afraid to collect unemployment for fear that it will interfere in terms of their ability to get a green card at a later time. So they're reticent about trying to collect benefits.
Perfect, Neil. I was listening to a podcast where they were talking to a doctor who's on an H-1 visa in, I believe it was Oregon, and he really wanted to help out the illnesses in the hospitals in New York. And he realized that he would give up his immigration status if he did that because he would not be employed.
Yeah, we've had that. We have several clients who are involved, interestingly enough, in COVID research and things like that. Some of them are trying to get national interest waivers and immigration benefits based on their work in COVID. We have a number of research scientists from around the world. And they're in fact, there was a case, not our case, but a case was rejected apparently in the Northeast for somebody who claimed to be a COVID-19 researcher, and immigration said her work was not necessarily worthy of extraordinary ability for extraordinary ability 1, EB1. And it may have been partly because her prior training had been in a different area of medicine, but it's very arbitrary. We should be doing more for foreign doctors involved in COVID for sure.
so we have a question. I don't know if anyone knows this. If someone who's been unemployed for over 18 months get the stimulus, even though they don't qualify for unemployment. We have a question.
Yeah, so my understanding, I'll take a shot. My understanding is the way the unemployment's working is there's been an agreement between the federal government and each of the states to administer the program. And so in the first instance, you apply for unemployment. Like, for example, in Texas, you would file with the Texas Workforce Commission, and it would be granted or denied based on the eligibility requirements. So at the end of the day, the eligibility for, I think, state unemployment would be required to provide benefits under the federal program. But that's going to be a very state-specific requirement. So I defer to the state systems regarding their eligibility.
A lot of us are talking, we're from different states, and as you can hear, state by state, there's some differences. We had a question that after Hurricane Katrina, a lot of the insurance companies were requiring emergency plans, et cetera. I don't know if anyone, I don't know if such a requirement in the state of Illinois, and I don't even think New York State after Superstorm Sandy.
No, it's funny. I was part of, I viewed a webinar yesterday on force majeure in New York and the issues that are going to come up as a result of COVID. And it's really going to be a very interesting situation as it unravels in terms of future leases and various relationships, based on force majeure.
Well, I understand there are 10 class actions, at least 10 class actions, challenging when an insurance company says they're not going to insure you, that there's quite a lot of litigation on this area, and it's going to be interesting. And the prediction is if insurance companies have to pay, they're going to declare bankruptcy. There's also a question. A lot of people, when they talk about bankruptcy, everyone thinks that they're going out of business, but not a lot of people are going out of business. They're just restructuring, trying to get rid of some of the debt that they have called a Chapter 11. And we're not, I don't know if anyone can talk to Chapter 7 versus Chapter 11, or maybe we could say go consult with an attorney who does specialize in that area. Does anyone want to comment on that?
I'll take a stab at it, just because back when I had hair and I was a young attorney, I did enough bankruptcies to at least know that it's not something I want to do anymore. But basically Chapter 7, at least the old way, was essentially you were allowed to keep a certain amount of cash and a certain amount of equity in a house and a certain amount of value in a vehicle. So you couldn't own a Rolls Royce that was paid off, for example, but you could own a 10-year-old car that you still had a loan on or something like that. And there were monetary limits and such. That was Chapter 7, essentially in exchange for showing that you had these assets that were exempt and the only other assets you had were under a certain threshold and that your liabilities were more. That was pretty much Chapter 7. Chapter 13 was basically a repayment plan. Think of like, I have $1 million that I owe and I have $800,000 available, and you kind of figure out a percentage of how you can pay back all the various creditors within the rules. Chapter 11 is kind of a bigger version of that. It's generally, considered business bankruptcy, but that's a reorganization plan. And essentially what you're doing is you are going to a judge and saying, I have X amount of assets and I have X times whatever liabilities, please help me pay 26% to all these people that I owe, or something like that, and help me restructure my leases and help me restructure my union contracts. That's basically what the judge is approving, is this giant plan to cut down percentages.
Again, I'm going to come back to talking about doing the well-being checks with your clients, because in just calling to saying, how are you doing? You might find out that in addition to the dealing with bringing in someone, a relative from another country through an immigration process, that their small businesses needs assistance, maybe a bankruptcy, in talking to someone on a workers' comp situation. Do they have a will? Powers of attorney. In the immigration area, we use in Illinois basically a temporary power of attorney in case someone, for whatever reason, can't take care of the kids. I would start exploring these things with people.
And the other caveat there would be that HIPAA is something you don't want to violate. So definitely talk to an employment lawyer before you do that, and ask Michael, hey, can I call my employee who I think might be suffering from COVID and ask them, oh, by the way, how are you feeling with that knee injury? That would be a can of worms you definitely don't want to open up unless you're sure.
Well, again, I'm not suggesting a business person do that. I'm suggesting that an attorney, in doing a well-being check, no, absolutely not. If your employer, when they're calling, how are you doing? To see what else, do you need anything? Is there anything else I can help with? I think, no, absolutely. I'm thinking that a lot of people were watching are attorneys in practicing with businesses.
Well, I actually had a client who tested, he kept telling me he was sick. And the more I listened to his symptoms, the more I realized that, oh, yeah, I think you've got COVID, go get tested.
That's
because
terrible.
And because he was a workers' comp client who was off work, and he remains off work, he's since recovered, he couldn't get tested because he didn't have any kind of way to pay for it. And I kept trying to give him resources so that, yeah, that does happen. And especially if we got older or ill clients, that's a good thing to do. I've been doing that with all my clients who are, older than I am.
Well, I want to say that our time is up. I want to thank all of the panelists. Nice to see some people again. Nice to meet new people. Fabulous, fabulous information. Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Skip. Thanks to the American Bar Association, and thank you for everyone who tuned in. This was great. Ali's going to send another link to the panelists so we can have a short meeting afterwards. If you could do so, I would appreciate it. Again, be well, be careful out there, and thank everyone again. Take care.
Thank you for organizing.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Great job.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.